Second language. A person's second language, or L2, is a language that is not the native language, first language, or loan of the speaker, but is learned later, usually as a foreign language, but it can be another language used in the speaker's home country. A speaker's dominant language, which is the language a speaker uses most or is most comfortable with, is not necessarily the speaker's first language. The second language can also be the dominant one. For example, the Canadian census defines first language for its purposes as the first language learned in childhood and still spoken, recognizing that for some the earliest language may be lost, a process known as language attrition. This can happen when young children move to a new language environment. Second language acquisition. Effective age, of age, of age, of age, of age, of age. The defining difference between a first language loan and a second language L2 is the age the person learned the language. For example, linguist Eric Lenneberg used second language to mean a language consciously acquired or used by its speaker after puberty. In most cases, people never achieve the same level of fluency and comprehension in their second languages as in their first language. These views are closely associated with the critical period hypothesis. In acquiring an L2, Hiltenstam 1992 found that around the age of 6 or 7 seemed to be a cutoff point for bilinguals to achieve native-like proficiency. After that age, L2 learners could get near native-likeness, but their language would, while consisting of few actual errors, have enough errors to set them apart from the lone group. The inability of some subjects to achieve native-like proficiency must be seen in relation to the age of onset AO. Later, Hiltenstam and Abrahamson 2003 modified their age cutoffs to argue that after childhood, in general, it becomes more and more difficult to acquire native-likeness, but that there is no cutoff point in particular. As we are learning more and more about the brain, there is a hypothesis that when a child is going through puberty, that is the time that accents start. Before a child goes through puberty, the chemical processes in the brain are more geared towards language and social communication, whereas after puberty, the ability for learning a language without an accent has been rerouted to function in another area of the brain, most likely in the frontal lobe area promoting cognitive functions, or in the neural system of hormone allocated for reproduction and sexual organ growth. As far as the relationship between age and eventual attainment in SLA is concerned, crashing. However, when it comes to the relationship between age and rate SLA, adults proceed through early stages of syntactic and morphological development faster than children, where time and exposure are held constant. Crashing. Long, Scarsella 5-3. Also, older children acquire faster than younger children do, again, in early stages of morphological and syntactic development, where time and exposure are held constant. 573. In other words, adults and older children are fast learners when it comes to the initial stage of foreign language education. Gauthier and Genesee 2011 have done a research which mainly focuses on the second language acquisition of internationally adopted children, and results show that early experiences of one language of children can. As for the fluency, it is better to do foreign language education at an early age, but being exposed to a foreign language since an early age causes a weak identification. Billiot, Maddens and Beerton 241. Such issue leads to a double sense of national belonging that makes one not sure of where he or she belongs to, because according to Brian A. Jacob, multicultural education affects students' relations, attitudes, and behaviors. Jacob 364. And as children learn more and more foreign languages, children start to adapt and get absorbed into the foreign culture that they undertake to describe themselves in ways that engage with representations others have made. Pratt 35. Due to such factors, learning foreign languages at an early age may incur one's perspective of his or her native country. Similarities and differences between learned and native proficiency. Speed. Acquiring a second language can be a lifelong learning process for many. Despite persistent efforts, most learners of a second language will never become fully native-like in it, although with practice considerable fluency can be achieved. However, children by around the age of 5 have more or less mastered their first language with the exception of vocabulary and a few grammatical structures, and the process is relatively very fast because language is a very complex skill. Moreover, if children start to learn a second language when they are 7 years old or younger, they will also be fully fluent with their second language in a faster speed comparing to the speed of learning by adults who start to learn a second language later in their life. Correction. In the first language, children do not respond to systematic correction. Furthermore, children who have limited input still acquire the first language, which is a significant difference between input and output. Children are exposed to a language environment of errors and lack of correction, but they end up having the capacity to figure out the grammatical rules. Error correction does not seem to have a direct influence on learning a second language. Instruction may affect the rate of learning, but the stages remain the same. Adolescents and adults who know the rule are faster than those who do not. In the learning of a second language, the correction of errors remains a controversial topic, with many differing schools of thought. Throughout the last century, much advancement has been made in research on the correction of students' errors. In the 1950s and 60s, the viewpoint of the day was that all errors must be corrected at all costs. Little thought went to students' feelings or self-esteem in regards to this constant correction. Russell, 2009. In the 1970s, Dulé and Burt's studies showed that learners acquire grammar forms and structures in a predetermined, inalterable order, and that teaching or correcting styles would not change this. Russell, 2009. In this same decade, Terrell 1977 did studies that showed that there were more factors to be considered in the classroom than the cognitive processing of the students. Russell, 2009. He contested that the affective side of students and their self-esteem were equally important to the teaching process. Russell, 2009. A few years later, in the 1980s, the strict grammar and corrective approach of the 1950s became obsolete. Researchers asserted that correction was often unnecessary and that instead of furthering students' learning, it was hindering them. Russell, 2009. The main concern at this time was relieving student stress and creating a warm environment for them. Stephen Krashen was a big proponent in this hands-off approach to error correction. Russell, 2009. The 1990s brought back the familiar idea that explicit grammar instruction and error correction was indeed useful for the SLA process. At this time, more research started to be undertaken to determine exactly which kinds of corrections are the most useful for students. In 1998, Lister concluded that recasts when the teacher repeats a student's incorrect utterance with the correct version are not always the most useful because students do not notice the correction. Russell, 2009. His studies in 2002 showed that students learn better when teachers help students recognize and correct their own errors. Russell, 2009. Mackey, Gass, and McDonough had similar findings in 2000 and attributed the success of this method to the students' active participation in the corrective processes. Depth of knowledge. According to Noam Chomsky, children will bridge the gap between input and output by their innate grammar because the input utterances they hear is so poor, but all children end up having complete knowledge of grammar. Chomsky calls it the poverty of stimulus. And second language learners can do this by applying the rules they learn to the sentence construction, for example. So learners in both their native and second language have knowledge that goes beyond what they have received, so that people can make correct utterances, phrases, sentences, questions, etc., that they have never learned or heard before. Emotionality. Bilingualism has been an advantage to today's world, and being bilingual gives the opportunity to understand and communicate with people with different cultural backgrounds. However, a study done by Optes and Digner in 2012 shows that sequential bilinguals, i.e., learn their L2 after loan, often relate themselves to the emotions more when they perceive these emotions by their first language/native language/loan, but feel less emotional when by their second language, even though they know the meaning of words clearly. The emotional distinction between loan and L2 indicates that the effective valence of words is processed less immediate in L2 because of the delayed vocabulary/lexical access to these two languages. Success. Success in language learning can be measured in two ways: likelihood and quality. First language learners will be successful in both measurements. It is inevitable that all people will learn a first language, and with few exceptions, they will be fully successful. For second language learners, success is not guaranteed. For one, learners may become fossilized or stuck, as it were, with ungrammatical items. Fossilization occurs when language errors become a permanent feature. See Cannell and Swain 1980, Johnson 1992, Selinker 1972, and Selinker and Lame-Della 1978. The difference between learners may be significant. As noted elsewhere, L2 learners rarely achieve complete native-like control of the second language. For L2 pronunciation, there are two principles that have been put forth by Levis 2005. The first is nativeness, which means the speaker's ability to approximately reach the speaking pattern of the second language of speakers, and the second, understanding, refers to the speaker's ability to make themselves understood. Being successful in learning a second language is often found to be challenging for some individuals. Research has been done to look into why some students are more successful than others. Stern 1975, Rubin 1975, and Rios 1985 are just a few of the researchers who have dedicated time to this subject. They have worked to determine what qualities make a good language learner. Malika, Newsel 1997. Some of their common findings are that a good language learner uses positive learning strategies, is an active learner who is constantly searching for meaning. Also, a good language learner demonstrates a willingness to practice and use the language in real communication. He also monitors himself and his learning, has a strong drive to communicate, and has a good ear and good listening skills. Malika, Newsel, 1997. Osger and Griffiths have designed an experiment in 2013 about the relationship between different motivations and second language acquisition. They looked at four types of motivations: intrinsic, inner feelings of learner; extrinsic, reward from outside; integrative, attitude towards learning; and instrumental, practical needs. According to the test results, the intrinsic part has been the main motivation for these students who learn English as their second language. However, students report themselves being strongly instrumentally motivated. In conclusion, learning a second language and being successful depend on every individual. Foreign language. In pedagogy and sociolinguistics, a distinction is made between second language and foreign language. The latter is being learned for use in an area where that language is originally from another country and not spoken in the native country of the speakers. And in other words, foreign language is used from the perspective of countries. The second language is used from the perspective of individuals. For example, English in countries such as India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, the Philippines, the Nordic countries, and the Netherlands is considered a second language by many of its speakers because they learn it young and use it regularly. Indeed, in parts of Southern Asia, it is the official language of the courts, government, and business. The same can be said for French in Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, although French is not an official language in any of them. In practice, French is widely used in a variety of contexts in these countries, and signs are normally printed in both Arabic and French. A similar phenomenon exists in post-Soviet states such as Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, where Russian can be considered a second language, and there are large Russophone communities. However, unlike in Hong Kong, English is considered a foreign language in China due to the lack of opportunities for use, such as historical links, media, conversation between people, and common vocabulary. Likewise, French would be considered a foreign language in Romania and Moldova, even though both French and Romanian are Romance languages, Romania's historical links to France, and all being members of La Francophonie. Benefits of bilingualism. Data for further information. Weber's report. George H.J. Weber, a Swiss businessman and independent scholar, founder of the Andaman Association and creator of the Encyclopedic Andaman.org website, made a report in December 1997 about the number of secondary speakers of the world's leading languages. Weber used the Fischer-Weltlmanach of 1986 as his primary and only source for the L2 speakers' data in preparing the data in the following table. These numbers are here compared with those referred to by Ethnologue, a popular source in the linguistics field. See below Table 1. Later data. Collecting the number of second language speakers of every language is extremely difficult, and even the best estimates contain guesswork. The data below are from Ethnologue.com as of June 2013. Notes and references.